I did not hit her. It's not true. It's bullshit. I did not hit her. I did not. Oh, hi, Mark.
So, I have been just caught up lately on the entire premise of So Bad That It's Good. The world of film is so massive. You could choose to dedicate your entire life, your entire career to being even just a small part of it. A ton of people have. We have this entire critical industry, education programs, colleges, whole schools of thought and film theory, all in place to help steer public consciousness towards this greater understanding of what's valuable and what's not in the movies that we watch. And then at the same time, directly parallel to that, we have a thriving subculture that specifically tries to seek out the most overwhelming failures imaginable. And for all the best bad ones that we found so far, I would say that their profile, their legacy, is only getting more and more prominent. I feel like there are a lot of cases where some of these have aged as better comedies than actual successful comedy films from the same era. 14 years after The Room, The Disaster Artist picked up 3 times its budget at the box office. 25 years after Ed Wood failed to make back its own budget, Netflix made the decision to spend Eddie Murphy money on the Dolomite movie. For anyone that spends a lot of time watching these, I feel like you find a select few that, for whatever reason, just hit you in particular. And for me, that's Roadhouse. My wife and I watched it on a whim a long time ago, and ever since then, we probably watch it together at least once every year. But if you take a common thread from all these movies, and you try to examine what makes it work or not work as that funny type of bad, I think it can be really easy to come to the conclusion that bad movie watching is basically just being mean-spirited. Because yeah, that Sharknado stuff, the imitation brand, that does not cut it. It has to be genuine. Something that someone tried to make because they thought it would be good, or because someone they worked for thought it would be good. And I think that observation is consistently true. Someone failing at something is a critical part of the recipe. So I can totally understand where the mean-spiritedness idea comes from, but at the same time, I feel like there's more to it than that. I think there's other layers at work in our brains when we watch this stuff. See, in my amateur and probably stupid and uninformed opinion, I see there as being like 3 overarching reasons why we love to watch a bad movie, why we find it so funny, or at the very least, why we find it so interesting. First, and I would say this has to be the least mean-spirited reason of all, it's because the space that allows for a production to end up with something so bad also happens to be the same space that allows for a lot more unfiltered creative freedom to leak through the process. In the best bad movies, so often what railroads the project into becoming truly terrible is that one person who didn't know what they were doing or who had bad ideas had immense control over the project. That allows for a lot of bad judgment, but it also means that the end result of what they turn out gets to be this weird window into the creator's mind. The Room is meant to be just like a normal drama, but instead it gets the opportunity to take all of these chances that make it so unbelievably bizarre. The whole time you're watching it, you're always passively aware of the fact that you're looking at a vision of what Tommy Wiseau thought that a good movie would look like. And for me at least, that becomes like the most hypnotic part of the whole experience. For a movie to cross over and become so bad it's good, instead of just bland and uninspired, it had to put itself out there to do it. It had to take some degree of risk to get itself to that point. The same way that a legitimately great movie had to take risks to set itself apart. The risks they took didn't work out, but it's so much less boring than if they just didn't take them at all. The second reason I think we love these movies so much, and it probably all comes from those gaps in the creative review process, is that the humor they offer to the viewer comes from this uncanny place. Why are they wearing tuxedos with no explanation while they toss around a football?
Gee, Peter, you're clumsy.
Why is the organized crime syndicate using a monster truck specifically to intimidate people into its protection racket? Why did they choose to have Scorpion yell suckers when he teleports away? Suckers! Why is this kid asking if she digs on multiverses?
Hold on, you dig on multiverses? Wait, you dig on multiverses? Maybe in the multiverse, neither of us farted.
Why is he telling us and showing us that he eats his tuna straight out the can?
I don't need much to live on anymore. I just eat tuna out of the can and live in the car.
Why are these reporters at the press conference acting like they're from the champ's own personal bad dream about having a press conference?
Do you think the fight was too easy?
Tommy, don't you think that this looked more like a Philadelphia sparring session at times instead of a championship match? For real.
Tommy, you ever think you're gonna get out from underneath Rocky Balboa's shadow?
Man, I won the title. What more do I have to do?
But this man will prove to be a great champion.
He might win a few fights, but a Rocky Balboa he'll never be.
Hey, man, I'll fight anybody, anywhere. Anywhere.
You watch any of these movies, it's really the same punchline over and over and over again. What were they thinking when they did this? But the format keeps it fresh, and so it never gets old. And then finally, the last main reason I think we like to laugh at these movies, why it really only works when someone involved legitimately tried to make something good, is because I think we enjoy experiencing these movies through the lens of a creator's hubris. There have to be thousands upon thousands of high schoolers or college kids that set out to make their own movie, and that ended up way worse than The Room or Troll 2, but making fun of a project that some inexperienced kids put together just feels weird and mean. You don't really see people doing that as much. And for sure, part of that is that movies like The Room are just going to be easier to sit down and watch. But also, they set up in a theater. They had billboards in California urging people to come and see it. They wanted to play during the right season so that it would qualify for the Oscars. It expected people to pay for the privilege of getting to see it, and that invisible line, commercial marketing specifically, is where I think a lot of these cross over, and where the most popular bad movies of all time get to sit comfortably in the crosshairs of anyone who feels like taking a piece out of it. And it's also in this element where I think we get the most surefire recipe for a great bad movie. The writer-director-star combo. It's something that some creators do even in successful cases. Just sometimes it really works out, other times it doesn't. But a lot of the most highly regarded bad movies employ this combo. The Room, Fateful Findings, Ben and Arthur. And I think a big part of it is that it just signals to the audience in the most obvious way possible that the hubris element is in full effect here. You have a guilt-free pass to laugh at the end result of what they turned out.
Really? Worst film you ever saw? Well, my next one will be better. Hello?
Now, the thing is that video games are just as, if not more likely to turn out a bad product as something from the film industry. So why don't we have a subculture for terrible games the same way that movies do? And I think the bottom line for that is that the medium just does not work as well for it. There's a really important distinction between watching something that sounds stupid and doing something that sounds stupid. Whatever hacked up mess ultimately makes its way onto our screen, we don't experience it by sitting back and just watching it happen. We have to go and be an active participant. Bizarre choices that show up in a movie let us step out for a moment, think to ourselves, what on earth were they thinking when they did this? Whereas bizarre choices in a game are more likely to just make us feel frustrated. There's a YouTube channel called Folding Ideas, and he's great by the way, but he has one video that I really enjoyed about a PlayStation 2 adaptation of Fievel Goes West. It looks horrible, and it's strange that Fievel specifically became the subject for a hacked out game like that, but while it's super interesting to learn about the game, I don't walk away thinking for even 1 second that I want to sit down and play it. Even if what I wanted was to just try and laugh at it, even if I decided I was going to try and approach it from just a hyper-analytic frame of mind, that's not really the same as having fun. Watching Roadhouse is fun. Watching The Room is fun. That's where the appeal is that drives this whole thing. There are bad movies out there riddled with way more technical flaws than what you see in the most popular ones. Constant humming over the audio, not being able to hear what anyone says, camera shaking or edits that make you feel sick. And those don't end up being the ones that we like to watch over and over again. Those don't end up being the classic midnight movies. A really great bad movie has to ride the balance between still having the ineptitude, the weirdness, but then also still being manageable enough to consume it as a piece of media. It feels like a challenge to me to try and name even 10 games that ride that line really well. The other part that I find tough is how to apply the whole hubris element to the experience. I just think that the voice of the creator is more immediately apparent to us in most cases for movies. I'm not saying that games aren't just as stylistic, just that even when I'm playing a game that comes from just one creator's vision, I don't spend much time during the experience thinking about them while I play it. With movies, I'm always fighting to keep that out of my mind. Maybe because in these movies, half the time the creators are also acting in it, I don't know. By all accounts, E.T. was one of the most well-known bad games ever made in the entire history of gaming. And it has some of the same issues that I just mentioned. It's frustrating, it's basically unplayable, but also, It's the result of programmers at Atari being compressed into an unworkable time frame and then forced to release a product they never had any faith in. It doesn't seem very funny on the surface, but when you dig down and find the substance of it, it doesn't really make it any funnier either. And don't get me wrong, that's obviously not to say that people working in the film industry aren't subject to some of the same crunch culture mindsets. It's just that it feels more obvious somehow that the only hubris involved in the whole E.T. disaster came entirely from the corporate side. Once again, it's fascinating to learn about it, but no one is making an annual tradition to play that game unless a former Atari executive is ritualistically punishing themselves. I just don't think it's as common for games to cross over the way that movies can. But that's not to say that it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen as much, but it's still possible. In fact, for the longest time ever, my favorite bad game was Mortal Kombat Mythologies Sub-Zero. Something wonderfully awful happened with the development of that game to give us the exact kind of experience that you need for this. The game is functionally playable, that's key. You can play the entire game and make it from the beginning all the way to the end. Although, if you're going to try that, I do recommend just using infinite lives. But right from the jump, the game just stands out as being stupid by the way that it's trying to apply 2D fighting game mechanics from the early MK games to something like this. There are a million little things that add up to the overall experience of playing through Mythologies. Because of the fact that it's so strictly applying control schemes from a 2D fighter, they can't just let the player turn around and go the other direction by pushing the D-pad or the joystick in the other way. You might need to step backwards or use a back input to do some kind of a special move. So they get around that by dedicating an entire button to turning your character around. And that translates into Sub-Zero just looking confused and disoriented most of the time. And you also feel confused and disoriented, all the while you're supposed to be controlling this elite ninja assassin. The enemies in the game adopt some of the same input reading mechanics that we all hate from the AI opponents from the early MK games, but not all the way, and so it translates into these jobbers either hilariously outperforming you with omnipotent bullshit counters, or just standing there like a doof. With them acting that way and Sub-Zero looking like he can't see out of his mask, the whole thing culminates into these really sloppy fights that look ridiculous. Then, since it's Mortal Kombat and gore is a ubiquitous part of the franchise, most of the combat and platforming deaths are over the top and bloody, which in this case just translates into being slapstick. Even when you just fall down, Sub-Zero has this scream that's been perfectly engineered for comedy every time. So many of the encounters in the game have this janky, awkward energy about them that just keeps coming up organically while you play it. Just during my original playthrough of the game, I had this moment where some guy was just hitting me and running away over and over again. I had this moment with Mr. Big Stuff, where I struggled to throw him over the side, and then I turn around and he's right there. I figured out that the turn button could double as the make Sub-Zero do the funky shuffle button, and I got myself stuck between Shinnok and his shield at the end for like an entire minute. The uncanny element shows up in the game design. It's Mortal Kombat, so you have to have fatalities, I guess, but it decides to shoehorn that concept in with just 2 boss fights for the whole game, and it also keeps the entire premise of having a short time window and an input combination that's not told to the player. That translates in no context whatsoever to the type of game that they made, but it's Mortal Kombat, so they just did it that way anyway. You have to fight Fujin at the end of the second level, and then they hit you with the whole blockbuster special, which is where they would stop kids who rented the game from being able to finish it, so they'd have to rent it again. Because after you beat him, you have to know to specifically run to the left side of the screen and crouch in this one particular spot, so you can hold on to this one particular brick and not be exploded. The end boss of the game can just be tricked and ignored, or you can decide to have a big climactic boss fight with them, but there's no apparent reason for there being a choice between the two. And then for the hubris side of it, for me that box is checked by the Mortal Kombat franchise itself. The fact that it thought it could just lift and shift its entire game mechanics from MK3, drop it into an action puzzle platform game and expect it to even remotely work, is completely insane. It's trying to make the jump to 3D, but it's still just using image capture sprites running over really bad looking 3D environments. And even the name, Mortal Kombat Mythologies Sub-Zero, implies that the idea was once this thing was a surefire hit, they'd be able to pump out even more titles for the other characters and just keep the spin-off money rolling. And the funny thing is, I don't even think that's a bad idea. A lot of people really liked Shaolin Monks. I would love to see a Streets of Rage style game with an MK setting. But that's not what happened. This is what happened. This is the game that they used to carry that concept to market. But I said before that Mortal Kombat Mythologies was my favorite bad game. I said was, because now I have finally gotten around to playing 2009's Rogue Warrior.
Today, that means flying under the radar, deep into North Korea.
If you've never heard of the game before, Rogue Warrior, or Dick Marcinko Rogue Warrior, I guess, is a first-person shooter released at the end of 2009, right in the absolute thick of the tidal wave of modern military shooters that were spamming the market after COD 4 turned into a mega hit. Actually, it's kind of unique in that it copies both the contemporary first-person shooter trend that came from COD 4, but also the third-person cover shooter trend that came from Gears of War, which was also spamming the market at the time. It really was that derivative, but I'm getting ahead of myself. See, if you're like me, then you might start this game and have never heard of Dick Marcinko before. I had absolutely no idea this was a real person when I started playing the game. I assumed it was some kind of franchise character that Bethesda was trying to make happen, just based on the title and the cover. But then the first sign that something is amiss here comes when you select a new game, and it asks you what difficulty do you want to play on. It has normal, hard, and easy mode, here referred to as regulars, elites, and recruits, but more specifically put in front of the player as, bring it on, motherfuckers, think you're fucking special, huh? And if you're a pussy, select this one. Which, by the way, expect a whole lot more swearing from here on out. But seeing that made me stop and check out the game's Wikipedia page before I kept going, and on there you'll notice that it says the game was written by Dick Marcinko, of Being on the Front Cover fame. It was not written by him, not according to the game's credits, but the idea that put in my head was that the game was about him, written by him, with his name and face on the box, and with a marketing blurb that promised players they would get to play as a real-life badass. I already understood this game had a reputation for being bad. That's actually the only thing I knew when I started playing it. So this really set off the old hubris radar. For those like me who did not know, yes, Dick Marcinko was a real person. Most importantly, as it relates to the game, he was a published author best known for his 1992 autobiography, Rogue Warrior. And considering its status as his best known work, and the name, you might assume that the game is an adaptation of the book, but that's actually where I'd like to take a bit of a detour away from the game, and instead talk for way too long about the Rogue Warrior verse. So, who exactly was Dick Marcinko? Well, the short version of the story is that he was a sailor in the US Navy, who during his service became a Navy SEAL, was highly decorated during multiple tours in Vietnam, became the original commanding officer of SEAL Team 6, and then retired after 30 years in the Navy right around the same time he was also charged and eventually convicted of defrauding the US government in a scheme to accept kickback payments from arms manufacturers that were overpricing for their equipment. It was during and immediately after his prison stint from the fraud conviction when he wrote Rogue Warrior. Curiosity got the better of me, so I have read the book. It is incredibly self-serving, even for an autobiography. And for the most part, it sort of just moves through different stages of his life, and gives him the space that he needs to talk about how manly he is, and about how right he was about anything that he ever argued with someone about. And then also about how a bunch of bureaucratic nerds set him up, with even the foreword telling us, as a gung-ho young SEAL officer in Vietnam, he operated behind enemy lines. While others dug in behind barbed wire and sandbags, Marcinko and his platoon, in black pajamas and barefoot, using captured Soviet weapons and ammo, hunted the Viet Cong deep inside their own turf. Indeed, if we're talking heroic here about Dick Marcinko, and I believe we should be, he is heroic in the classic sense of the word. Dick's warrior hubris was too much for some of the Pentagon's Olympians, and so a few Navy technocrat gods brought him down as an example to others. Now, you might have noticed there that Marcinko is painted as an absolute badass, but at the expense of other rank-and-file soldiers who also served in Vietnam. The ones who just dug in behind barbed wire and sandbags. This will end up being a consistent theme at different points in the book. His favorite way to explain to the reader just how rough, gruff, McTuff stuff he was is usually to draw a comparison to various not grizzled enough men sprinkled throughout his past. The goddamn Air Force was probably taking a coffee break. That's how they worked. Like Union bus drivers most of the time. 6 or 7 hours of flight time, not to exceed this or that altitude, of course. And then it was bye-bye for a daddy change, a nap, and a cup of cocoa. The long version of the story kicks off with Marcinko leading SEAL Team 6 on a training exercise, commenting on how badass it is to jump out of planes, which, to be fair, yeah. About how he's mad that it's just a training exercise and they don't get to actually kill people. And about how SEAL Team 6 was the best military team to ever exist in the entire history of all organized military. SEAL Team 6 trained harder than any unit had ever trained before, waiting for the opportunity to show the skeptical bureaucrat, sailor, and dip-dunk bean counters prevalent in Washington that it was possible for the U.S. Navy to fight back. But even in Vietnam, the system kept me from hunting and killing as many of the enemy as I would have liked. Since Vietnam, no one had given me the chance to do that job again until I'd been ordered to create this team of men, whose only job, I was promised, would be the hunting and killing of other men. He goes on at the end of the exercise to say that he pretends to curse into a phone so that his team would think that he's yelling at the brass and somehow earn their respect. But then he actually does yell at and also threaten an army colonel. But his men, he claims, hold him back and then warn the colonel, "Oh man, you don't want any of this business, you're not going to be safe." And then the colonel runs away scared with his tail tucked between his legs because Marcinko is just so wild and so untamed. The Beetle Bailey colonel was peering into the fuselage of my C-141. He turned to me. "Commander, you have beer in there? That's against regulation." I started toward him. "Hey, Colonel, how'd you like a new asshole?" After that, he takes us back to the beginning and spends a real short stint on his childhood. That he dropped out of school, started working very young, drank with a bunch of frat guys, and sort of putts around his hometown for a while before eventually he joins the Navy. And when he does join, he gets straddled with more of an administrative type of job. And that begins what becomes a consistent pattern for every 10 pages or so throughout the entire book. Marcinko is constantly over the course of his career beset on one side by a revolving door of pencil-dicked nerds who love paperwork and procedure, men who are too timid and fearful to drink beer and curse, while on the opposite side, he's supported by an equally revolving door of admirable hunks of man-meat carved from granite who look tough and sound tough and drink beer and curse and speak the truth. In this beginning section of the book, his adversaries are a co-worker nerd who annoys him and his female commanding officer who, for some unknown reason, does not like him. My watchmate drove me crazy. He was a real sniveler, a pug-nosed, acne-faced mama's boy named Harold who picked his ears all day and complained about everything. I called him the whiner. And the ugliest female I'd ever set eyes on in my life. I called her the Big Female Ugly Commander, or Big Fuck for short. He claims to have eventually punched the whiner in the head so hard that he had to be hospitalized for a month, and that this triggered an altercation in the bathroom with another different superior than the Big Fuck, during which he just knees the other guy in the groin a dozen times. But then, it turns out that since he didn't start the bathroom fight, he's outsmarted his superiors and they can't get him in trouble or reprimand him in any way. Even though he also just claimed to have hospitalized a coworker for a month by sucker punching them in the back of the head over an argument about missing paperwork.
My father would womanize, he would drink, he would make outrageous claims like he invented the question mark.
Either way, he says that he gets sent off to train with special forces because he was just too much of a bad boy for the bureaucratic institution to keep him contained. Basically, that special forces would beat the aggression out of him. Now, I'm not sure if that's how it works to get special opportunities in the military, but to be fair, I would not know. He spends a long time after that talking about his time in special training, learning to become a frogman. He talks about learning about amphibious warfare, gets married and has a kid, tells some anecdotes about how cool he was when he made people mad at him, he cheats on his wife, and he intimidates other sailors in the lunchroom by sucking spaghetti noodles up through his nose. Eventually, he gets the chance to join the SEAL program by going and serving in Vietnam. Marcinko, the reason I'm going to send you to Vietnam has nothing to do with logic or with the pitiful excuse for begging you just performed. I want to inflict you on those poor Vietnamese bastards for two reasons. First, it'll deprive you of pussy. That'll make you especially mean, which will result in a high number of VC casualties, and I'll look good as a result. Second, you're the most junior guy here, so you're expendable cannon fodder. If you step on a mine or get sniped, we don't lose much experience, and I'll still look good. So pack your bags. And so he gets to Vietnam, and he describes himself as being just absolutely giddy about the prospect of getting out there and being able to start killing people. And he was highly decorated in Vietnam, 4 Bronze Stars and 1 Silver Star. And he spends a good while in the book talking about how he sets up ambushes on the Viet Cong, interspersing it here and there with little sprinkles of racism and homophobia. Once he finishes his first tour in Vietnam, he comes back home and says that his family is overjoyed to have him back, and then that he immediately just goes and asks for another tour from his bosses without talking to his family about it first. So far as I was concerned back then, my home life was less important than my job. Period. I felt closer to the men with whom I served than I did my wife and kids. We'd been through more together than most husbands and wives go through in a lifetime. I poked my thumb toward the sleeping kids. I'm gonna miss them. They'll miss you too. They've only gotten to know you, and now you're going again. Hey, missing kids is part of what being a SEAL is about. There are times, Dick, when your being a SEAL begins to grate on us all. It's what I am, Kathy. It's what I do. In addition, he also heavily implies that he continues to cheat on his wife while he's in Vietnam, but also just constantly. But anyway, while he's in Vietnam for his second tour, he and his team get caught up in the Tet Offensive and are taken by surprise, which leads to him losing the first member of his squad as a commanding officer. Now, prior to this point in the book, he has spent a lot of words talking about the details of the ambushes that he ran. He talks about using a higher volume of bullets than necessary and mangling the bodies. He talks about laughing to himself when he hears an explosion after he booby-traps a dead body. He at one point refers to the women and children of North Vietnam as Mrs. Charlie and the Little Charlies when he's dismissing concerns about how they could get caught up in the crossfire of the war. But when his team member is hit by a VC sniper, he spends a long stretch of time going on a racist tirade about the Vietnamese people in general, including the South Vietnamese. Now, I don't necessarily find it surprising that an American serviceman in Vietnam who watches one of his men die at the hands of the VC would have an extreme and emotional reaction to that experience. But really at no point in the book do these two lines of thinking ever converge and lead to any sort of introspection. The parts about killing the Vietnamese happen, and then the parts about losing his men happen. One just sort of leads into the other without any examination. And then from that point on, we start to get a lot more racist quips being mixed in with the narrative. First about the Vietnamese, later about Cambodian people, eventually mostly just about Arabic people. After his second tour finishes up, he ends up working at the Pentagon for a while, goes to Cambodia, eats some cobra venom, cheats on his wife a bunch more, takes a commanding officer role of a team of SEALs, and eventually finds himself in the Situation Room during Operation Eagle Claw, the infamously botched rescue attempt of the U.S. hostages held in Iran during the Carter administration. Like many other points in the book, he goes out of his way to explain before the operation goes badly how he told people what they should have done, and that when things start to turn dire, the other smart masculine men in the Situation Room all make a special point to tell him that he was so right about how it should have gone. But after things do turn bad, he recounts a situation where a busload of Iranian civilians have stumbled into being detained by U.S. Special Forces on the ground. What should we do with the Iranians from the bus? I answered for him. Kill the sons of bitches. My colleagues looked at me incredulously. Just kidding, I told them. I wasn't kidding at all. He concludes that chapter talking about the tragic horror of the men who lost their lives in the helicopter crash, striking a very somber note, but right after casually suggesting that they should clandestinely murder 40-some Iranian civilians. It's a line of thinking that, again, never receives absolutely any level of introspection. After that, he goes on to notch probably his most high-profile career achievement, which is the formation of SEAL Team 6. If you're not familiar with SEAL Team 6, that's the team who would eventually kill Osama bin Laden. Ironically, during his time leading the team, he only ever got the chance to lead them in practice exercises, which is something that he says drove him absolutely nuts. Another event that he spends a lot of time on is an instance where he was sent to help inspect security measures for the U.S. Embassy in Beirut, Lebanon, which would eventually be attacked by a suicide bomber in 1983. As with most things we explore in the book, the point here is to cover how Marcinko knew what was best and how other people, especially bureaucratic people, just get in the way of him getting stuff done. According to him, he found that some of the physical barriers in place weren't good enough, but that the ambassador just didn't care. And that also he wanted to employ a radio device that he claims would automatically detonate any car bomb within a certain radius of it. The ambassador rejects that, and he talks about it like the ambassador not wanting to do that is the least common sense thing imaginable. But I do have to say, I'm not that surprised that the US State Department wouldn't want to assume accountability for passively and indiscriminately exploding any car bomb in a nearby radius on foreign soil. Still, the main idea he wants to get across to the reader is, he visited the US Embassy in Beirut to inspect and improve security. Shortly after that, it got bombed and many people died. But that was actually everybody else's fault. Eventually, due to various issues with his command, as well as him just sort of generally being like the Navy equivalent of Todd Packer from The Office, he ends up having to give up command of SEAL Team 6 and is also prevented from going to the National War College. I hear I'm not going to be allowed to go to the National War College. Dave hemmed and hawed, and finally he spoke. Well, Dick, policy is not to send people who don't have a 95% chance of promotion to captain. Does that include me? It appears that way. You have an Article 15, an official letter of reprimand on your record. I'm appealing it. I was reprimanded for an auto accident in which I wasn't even driving. My driver got into the fender bender, not me. The letter says your driver had been on duty for more than 8 hours. That's working him too long. We didn't punch clocks at 6. Dave. Once again there, not his fault as the commander, his team member's fault driving the car. He also mentions at this time that him and his wife become separated, which after talking about cheating on her throughout most of the book, saying that he cared more about his SEALs than he did his wife and kids, he now describes as them drifting apart and becoming different people. But after all those trials and tribulations, he gets another big break in the form of the Admiralty asking him to put together a team that would be used as simulated terrorists to test different Navy installations with security exercises. He called the team Red Cell, and while in command of it, he would basically go on a tour of different sites and act like a gigantic asshole to everybody he was supposed to work with. Essentially what would happen is, they would set up the rules for the wargame, he would immediately break the rules of the wargame, the other officer would get pissed at him for winning by breaking the rules, and then he would say to them, you can't expect terrorists to follow the rules. And the other thing he was doing at this time was just partying non-stop with his team while they traveled around the country. Women ogled muscular seals. Seals ogled shapely women. Pooster fell in love. We wrestled with each other and tossed anybody we could get our hands on, especially pretty young things, into the surf. We played seal volleyball, which is a full contact sport. I lay on my back on the lobster boat's foredeck, cold, wet, and salty. My wallet was squishy. My shoes were flotsam. Snake's fingerprints were visible like 5 hickeys on my neck where he'd one-handed me out of the water. My Adam's apple throbbed in pain. But the sun was bright, and the sky was blue, and somebody was standing above me, dribbling beer into my open mouth. I thought, God put me on this earth so I could be here and do this, with these men, my men. It was absolutely, totally, incontrovertibly, completely, utterly fucking perfect. Finally, he gets put on a kind of administrative leave at the end of his Navy career while he's being investigated for the whole kickback scheme thing, which he doesn't spend a lot of time going into the details of, other than just saying that it was a witch hunt. Either way, he retires from the Navy after 30 years of service, but then subsequently gets convicted for defrauding the US government and sentenced to just under 2 years in prison. Didn't I feel guilty for using so much profanity? Didn't I feel guilty about the strong-arm methods I used to get what I wanted? Didn't I feel guilty about making my superiors eat shit? My answer has always been the same. Guilty. Absolutely. Guilty as charged. Guilty of putting my men before bureaucratic bullshit. Guilty of spending as much money as I can get my hands on to train my men properly. Guilty of preparing for war instead of peace. Of all these things, I am indeed guilty. The book abruptly ends with Marcinko claiming that he can bench press 500 pounds and that a clandestine government organization has contacted him in prison to help with the upcoming Desert Storm because the Pentagon secretly knows they won't be able to do a good job like he could, and also that now SEAL Team 6 is trash because he's not in charge of it anymore. Now, because of what ends up happening next, I think that last part about the Shadow Organization might be a deliberate sudden shift from non-fiction autobiography into complete fiction, but I'm honestly not sure what was intended with it. It's odd. Either way, that brings us to the many, many, many sequels to 1992's Rogue Warrior. In an interesting and bizarre move that I can't personally think of any similar examples of, Marcinko follows up his autobiography by parlaying it into a series of fiction books that act as sequels to the autobiography. So they're essentially pulp spy thrillers that feature himself as the main character. I won't spend as much time talking about these books as I did the original, but I do think understanding them is actually more important to understanding where this game came from. The first one to release was Red Cell from 1994, in which an evil bureaucrat tries to funnel nuclear weapons to North Korea, and it's up to Dick Marcinko to stop them. You may have been a hell of a brain surgeon, Marcinko, but you flunked bedside manner. I promptly told him, doom on you, Tom. That meant he should go fuck himself in Vietnamese. Then I proceeded to explain myself in my usual gentle style. I'll give you a fucking dose of bedside manner. I'll make you eat the fucking bed. After that, we've got Green Team from 1995, where a bunch of admirals from both the US and the UK are all blown up, and it turns out that a British aristocrat of Arab descent is trying to launch the world into a fundamentalist Islamic terror campaign. I know. You're asking, what the fuck? What the hell's going on? What's Dickie doing back in the third world when he should be at home at Rogue Manor? Just climbing out of the jacuzzi, clutching a tall, frosted glass of Bombay on the rocks in one hand, and something warm, wonderful, and remarkably full-breasted in the other? The president asked for my opinion. I told him I concurred with my boss. Added that we somehow had to show the Egyptians that they couldn't lie to us about harboring terrorists, but that we couldn't do it overtly. The president nodded in agreement. Then we have Task Force Blue from 1996, in which a network of domestic terrorists plan to start a new American revolution on the anniversary of the Waco siege. The 12-person SWAT unit that showed up included 7 females, one of whom had bigger pecs than Nasty, and he presses 400 pounds. 6 Hispanics, 3 African Americans, 2 conspicuous representatives of what might be called in bureau speak single-sex relationships, 1 Asian, 1 Native American, and 1 lonely white wasp male. They sure were diverse. The only problem was they had never trained together. They'd probably all been too busy going to EEO, that's Equal Employment Opportunity, classes to bother with unimportant details like learning how to shoot, loot, and function as a team. You might have noticed in that last one that he created a fictionally hyper-diverse SWAT team that are fictionally bad at their jobs, so that he could tie the diversity to the fact that they weren't good at their jobs. So that's, very neat of him. After that one is Designation Gold from 1997, where Marcinko is investigating the murder of his own godson and then stumbles onto a Russian plot to move nuclear weapons into Syria so they can be used against Israel, with it once again being up to the rogue warrior himself to save the day. He was silhouetted against the dasher for an instant as a flashbang went off somewhere behind him, and I tagged him, a ragged burst that caught him in the leg, thigh, groin, belly, and chest of his bad threads. Okay, so it wasn't pretty shooting, but it did the job. 4 down. Right then, like a big angry croc, I smashed through the surface with a roar, reached up, grabbed him by his belt and his crotch, and brought him smack head first down in the water. Then you have SEAL Force Alpha from 1998, which is basically about Dick Marcinko having to stop China from invading Taiwan. Then there's Option Delta from 1999, where Marcinko has to stop a group of neo-Nazis in Germany from overthrowing the German government and using stolen nukes, again, in some sort of way or another. I saw his eyes widen as he discovered my arm and leaned forward to see what it was attached to. I reached up, put the muzzle of the gun under the thick beard on his chinny chin, squeezed the PW's trigger before the son of a bitch could react, put a 3-round burst up and into his head. In 2000's Echo Platoon, Marcinko and his band of merry men come together to stop Iran and Russia from cornering the oil market. I should also admit that even the flattering photo spreads in Town and Country and Architectural Digest hadn't done credit to her. Mary Beth Madison may have been 37, but she had the muscle tone and firm skin of a woman who worked out regularly with a private trainer, and so she looked 10 years younger than she was. In Detachment Bravo from 2001, he works with forces in the UK to stop an IRA splinter group from carrying out some sort of massive terror campaign on England. That, folks, is what happens when you are governed by alleged leaders who see the military as yet another opportunity for social experimentation. So here we were, politically correct, nationality diverse, and nearly balanced by service. But we were probably gonna get ourselves killed. Except, these assholes were not warriors. If they had been warriors, they would not have hesitated. They would have pulled the trigger as soon as they sensed movement. They would have shot through the goddamn wall and hit us outside. Instead, they just stood there, frozen, like jack-lighted deer. Since I am a warrior, I do know how to take yes for an answer. So, I didn't hesitate. I took down the portmost target with a 5.67 quick shots in the face, chest, groin, and legs. My gun was empty. There were still bad guys left alive, and there was not time to transition to my sub-gun. Maybe I could commit assault with a friendly weapon and beat them all to death with my dick. Then it's back to stolen nuclear weapons in 2002 for Violence of Action, where a rogue former colonel is planning to use one on the city of Portland, Oregon, which makes Marcinko have to cut his vacation short so he can stop him. Such men don't follow theories, philosophies, or cardboard commanders. They follow leaders, and I am a leader, the wrathful god of war and combat. My men knew they'd never find me behind them. They knew it was their job to keep up with me. Who's the solution? I am. Me. And those I've molded into mirror images of my rogue warrior self are good for what ails this embattled world. Finished on the bench, I grabbed a towel from the black rubber gym floor and sopped rivers of sweat from my face and neck. Then I grabbed a basketball and sank a nice three-pointer from mid-court. I'm 240 pounds of muscle strapped to a stainless steel frame. I'm running 8-minute miles, and every other day I swim 2,000 meters. Wait a minute, you may well ask. How is it the Rogue Warrior? Bane of the United States Navy and scourge of its elite SEAL team since being railroaded through not one but 2 show trials at the American taxpayers' expense, can now freely hang out with the ultimate in counter-terrorist units, SEAL Team 6. You tried to fuck me, son, I growled. You came here thinking you'd break it off in my ass, on my time, on my dime. You were wrong. I met a waitress named Roxanne at my local diner for my first night in town and ended up fucking each other silly for the rest of the weekend. She was a leggy, blonde former airline stew who'd burned out on flying the friendly skies and getting hit on by middle-aged pilots whose wives thought their husbands were cockpit commandos ever since September 11th, 2001. It was easy to tell she's been bored to death by the hometown cock monsters. Every night I gave her free play with the Rogue's Royal 10 inches and happily let her work out her wildest fantasies. In 2005, we get Vengeance, where someone who was related to a terrorist that Marcinko killed at some point is now on a mission to get revenge. Cyanide, mimicked Trace. The girl can be a real devil when she wants. 28 years old, 5'8", and built rock solid. Her Achilles heel is a sarcastic sense of humor that never knows when to call it quits. Must be why I love her so much. More likely they felt they were protecting their turf from a homeless insecurity doofer, but I didn't bother arguing with her. I'm supposed to be in Iowa the day after tomorrow, but I think I ought to hang around and see if I can come up with anything, I said. Can you rearrange that for me? All right, Dick. Whatever you want. Whatever I want? There was a long pause. Whatever you want, she said finally. My contact person in Iowa was a sawed-off female spark plug named Cordella Hunt, who had just been put in charge of a special anti-terrorist task force under the Iowa Department of Public Safety. I'd call Cordella a bitch, but I'm not in a generous mood. She's the kind of woman who thinks she has to curse twice as hard, fight 3 times as dirty, and drink 5 times as much as any man she meets, just to prove she's in the game. Yup, my kind of gal. A barilla. Half broad, half gorilla. Then we get Holy Terror in 2006, where Marcinko is at a NATO conference in Vatican City and discovers that an Islamic terror campaign is getting put together against the Catholic Church. This one in particular, more than the others, seems to have a lot of anti-Islamic and anti-Arabic rhetoric laced throughout it, even just from what I saw skimming through all of these. He kicks things off by going on a weird rant where he calls Saladin an obscure and failed world leader, and by the end of the section he progresses to just throwing out full-on slurs. Osama bite my butt Laden didn't use the name, but it isn't hard to see parallels between his aims and Saladin's goal of a pan-Arab empire. But our struggle is far from over. On the contrary, It's more dangerous now. Every whack job in Islam is vying to become in chief. Let's state the problem directly. If the successor to bin Laden exploded a nuclear weapon here in Rome, how would NATO respond? Would nuking Mecca be out of the question? When I blinked my eyes open, I saw that I was holding 4 guns in each hand, which was handy, because 8 terrorists were jumping up in surprise from behind the rear pillar of the papal altar a few feet away. I promise I'm almost done here. There's just 2 more before we get to the point where the game actually comes out. The first of those 2 is Dictator's Ransom in 2008. In this one, it turns out that Kim Jong-il is a massive Dick Marcinko fan, and his son has been kidnapped, so he's determined to bring Marcinko to North Korea so he can help him crack the case. With the dogs gone, a gorgeous woman emerged from the car. When I say gorgeous, I don't mean drop-dead gorgeous. I mean kick you in the throat, douse you with kerosene, burn you to a crisp with no trace of remorse gorgeous. She was Asian. Black hair, red skirt, short skirt, and a figure that demanded you do politically incorrect things in public. I'll spare you the rest of the conversation, which included a lively discussion of Korean culinary highlights such as rotted cabbage and dried dog innards. The waitress appeared with our drinks. She had a green and red dragon tattoo that ran up the side of her right arm. The tail circled above her cleavage. A few of the kids stepped forward holding copies of my last book. Naturally, I began signing them. They may be commies in training, but they have good literary taste. They really do admire Rogue Warrior books here, said Khmer. The books are studied for insight into the Western mind. The Rogue Warrior ethos touches on something very Korean at its core. Then finally we have Seize the Day in 2009, where Marcinko is asked by the CIA to pretend to be Fidel Castro on video because he apparently looks so much like him. And so they think they can distribute the tape to the Cuban people and confuse them. Meanwhile, Castro is on his deathbed and is making a plan to send diseased immigrants to America to poison us or something. But it's at this point in the Rogue Warrior verse, after 13 books of a man's fan fiction he wrote about himself, that we finally get the game. So, even though it shares the name of his original autobiography, the thing to remember is that the DNA of the game shares way more in common with this long string of pulpy sequels than it has anything to do with the original book. And the reason I spent so much time talking about it all here, other than just finding it really funny that someone wrote so many books about themselves fictionally saving the world from bad guys and not being 6 years old, is that it goes back to that perfect recipe for what makes a great bad movie. If you're looking for someone to strut right in and check that hubris box, look no further than the face that greets you the moment you turn on the game. I don't know what exactly led Bethesda to decide to make this game, but I feel like I can hazard an educated guess. I think the 2 most likely possibilities here are that it was either A, an IP that they snatched up quickly during the wave of contemporary military shooters, or B, that Marcinko contracted Bethesda to make the game on his behalf. And personally, I think the latter scenario is the most likely one. I could easily imagine Marcinko operating his radio show and putting out his books, knowing generally about the existence of video games, thinking that he would fit right in with the shooters that were selling at the time. More specifically, I think it because the game was developed by Rebellion, who are probably best known for the Sniper Elite franchise, but that they weren't the first developer to take it on. And they didn't seem to have some kind of passionate stake for getting the project done either. During an old E3 interview for the game, one of the producers from Rebellion described the situation as Bethesda approaching them to help them get the job done after the original studio wasn't meeting their quality standards. Now, spoiler alert, the game still does not get done to what I sure as fuck hope their quality standards would be. But I get the sense that Rebellion basically came in as a workman-like studio to help Bethesda get through the contract obligation and be able to say with a straight face that they put out a working game. Like I mentioned before, the game is not actually written by Marcinko, but instead by a pair of writers working for Rebellion. Maybe with notes from Marcinko or something, but in the game's credits he isn't listed as anything, he's just under the special thanks. I also want to take a second to mention here, and I'll bring it back up later, that the soundtrack for this game is pretty well done. But forgetting that for now, the game takes place in 1986 with Marcinko as an active Navy SEAL, and it makes the decision to adapt its own story independent of the autobiography and any of the later books. So even though this is set during the time covered in the autobiography, this is very much the character lifted from the fictional sequels. But anyway, finally getting into the game itself, let's go all the way back to that difficulty selection, bringing in the energy of the game right away before the gameplay even starts. I elected to play the game on Pussy because I don't have a complex about my masculinity. And as the game loads in for the first mission, you're informed that it's 1986 and that Marcinko is being sent secretly into North Korea to investigate a factory that's making some new breed of missile. And the moment the first cutscene starts, the player encounters the single most critical decision made in the game's development, which is the choice to cast Mickey Rourke as the voice of Dick Marcinko. Rourke's gravel-voiced, half-enthusiastic line reading of the ridiculous things that Marcinko says is the absolute lifeblood of this game.
A spec warrior. One who gives a fuck. That's me. Whether I'm prowling and growling or going full fucking Faulkner with lots of sound and fury, you count on this. I get the job done.
Then, in addition to finding out why we're going into North Korea, we get introduced to our team for the mission. A pair of Navy SEALs that we've trained and that have no voices, because the game wasn't about to go through the process of finding two entirely different people to do voice work. In fact, the entire game consists of 8 voices. Marcinko, Admiral Peyton, who's your guy in the chair, 3 North Korean soldier voices, and 3 Russian soldier voices. But he explains to us why these 2 men are about to be indispensable to the operation.
I trained these men up through the SEAL program. They've saved my ugly ass more than once. They're dirtbags and hard motherfuckers. And when I'm staring death in the face, it's them I want watching my 6.
So the boys touch down in North Korea on a dark and stormy night, and then ambush a group of North Korean soldiers out on patrol. They sneak up and kill 3 of the 4 soldiers, and then for some reason, the last remaining soldier who just watched his partner have his throat sliced open, raises up his gun and orders the throat-slitting member of Marcinko's team to stand down, which allows him to get shot instead of just lighting up the guy that he just watched kill someone with a knife like 5 feet in front of him. Marcinko reminds his men to shoot the wounded, and then we can get down to business. Except, unfortunately for the boys though, this game was never going to go into the work of incorporating friendly AI. So the soldier they just shot decides to pull the pin on a grenade that he has on his body, and Marcinko's boys see that, and stare at it, and then at each other, and then still don't actually react by moving their bodies for literally like 10 straight seconds.
They've saved my ugly ass more than once. They're dirtbags and hard motherfuckers. And when I'm staring death in the face, it's them I want watching my 6.
And just like that, you're on your own from here on out. Marcinko reports to Admiral Peyton that the boys are dead, and for the first time, Peyton orders Marcinko to abort the mission. But Marcinko explains back to him why they can't do that.
My men are dead.
Jesus Christ! Abort!
Fuck no.
Once you're actually playing the game, it's real simple. You've got 2 weapon slots, pistols have unlimited ammo, and you can sneak up on enemies or just sprint directly up to them to initiate a close combat kill. Playing the game on Pussy, you really only ever have to play the game as a first-person shooter, whereas on the 2 higher difficulties, you more often have to switch the game into third-person cover shooter mode. In general, I would say the game is way more fun when it's being played as a first-person shooter. The third-person cover mechanics feel crappy, and it's not like the FPS mechanics are going to put the industry on notice or anything, but they are functional enough to just give you a working gameplay loop so you can get through it. The close combat kills, though, what this feels a lot like to me is the execution mechanics from Manhunt. In fact, some of these kills even really look like Manhunt kills, all the way down to the way that Marcinko and James Earl Cash stand over someone after they've stabbed them to death. But the part that really matters is that the line reads from Mickey Rourke come fast and furious throughout the game. Some of them pop up in a pre-scripted event, some of them happen organically by random chance, but in the game files there are like 7 to 8 dozen lines that he's recorded to be popped off after he shoots somebody or knifes someone or throws a grenade at someone. And then there's also like another dozen lines for taking damage, and most of those are just the same 5 curse words rearranged into different orders. Like I said, this is where the lifeblood of this game is found, especially as a comedy.
Rock and roll, motherfuckers, rock and roll. Drop dead, motherfucker, you fucking amateurs. Bring the noise, bitch. Goddamn cock breath coming, motherfuckers. Go fetch, catch it. Better dead than red, asshole. Lights out, motherfucker. Chew on this, fuckhead. Motherfucking bitch. Looks like the douchebag convention's in town. Fucking commie rent-a-cops. You fucking pig farmers. That's right, Nighty-Night, you sweet piece of shit. Come on, you shit-stained bleed all over the place, you pig. President Reagan sends his regards. Special delivery, assholes. Eat dirt, you pussy motherfucker, you puss nuts, eat dirt. Get dead, fuckbag. The Soviet fucking Union can fondle my hairy nuts. Let me know what it's like in commie heaven. Get this, you fucking retard, you dead piece of shit. Suck my balls, my hairy fucking big balls. Wrap them around your fucking mouth.
Now back to the story. We sneak around this secret area where a spy is waiting for us and kill a ton of North Korean soldiers. And keeping true with the covert nature of the mission, we throw them out of windows, we call them commies while we shoot at them, we break into the target apartment building by shooting everybody out front and running through the front door. Eventually, the whole thing culminates into a moment where North Korean soldiers burst through an apartment wall like the Kool-Aid Man. And the next thing that I noticed from a gameplay perspective is that there's a weird thing happening with the guns, just strictly from a game design standpoint. You start every mission with an assault rifle and a silenced pistol, and if you pick up a weapon either from an enemy that's dropped it, or if you just find one lying around, you'll end up having that weapon and a pretty good supply of ammo for it. If you kill an enemy that's using the same type of gun, or if you walk over another copy of the gun you're carrying, it gives you a much smaller amount of ammunition, like 17 rounds for example. That makes sense, because if it didn't work that way, you would pick up an AK at the beginning of every level and then max out your ammo every single time you kill anyone. But the weird thing is, if you swap out your assault rifle for an AK, and then later in the level you swap out the AK for a shotgun, and the shotgun runs out and you find another AK, it'll pick up the new AK with only that bonus amount of ammo. The game is not hard anyway, but it's a weird dynamic where each time that you get through the ammo of a gun, it almost feels used up. It seems pretty easy to imagine how something like that happens in the code, but it still feels really goofy during gameplay. The other thing I noticed, and speaking of the North Koreans bursting through the wall to come get you, I gotta call out again that the music in the game is pretty good, especially if you're grading it on a curve. Even when I know I'm playing trash, it's doing a pretty good job of keeping the feeling alive. Anywho, the informant you're supposed to meet gets killed like literally 2 seconds before you walk in the door, probably so that he wouldn't have to do voice work, and then we're on our way to find the missiles in a munitions factory and blow them up, if necessary.
That's the factory. The great leader must have a tiny dick.
We find the missile factory and discover that it's already shipped some of the missiles, but there's still some there, so we're going to blow them up, presumably to prevent the North Korean regime from gaining access to whatever kind of missile technology this could have enabled them to have. Remember, 1986, so this is before North Korea is at the point where they have ICBMs. And I would argue it's a little forward for the US to just blow up a factory in North Korea's sovereign territory, but you know, the evidence looks like the enemy country without WMDs is about to become an enemy country with WMDs, so maybe America just had to make the jump. Somehow sneaking into a country and gunning down an apartment complex full of that country's military isn't going to be a declaration of war, and I guess blowing up their arms factory isn't a declaration of war either. But we blow up the missile factory and then take off in a truck somewhere out into the wilds of North Korea to continue our mission. Which our mission now is to find our way to the docks, where it sounds like the missiles are being shipped somewhere via boat. That's even more promising. Not only is North Korea getting ready to turn into a nuclear-armed state, we don't even know who else they might be bringing along with them. So America might have to dig into this. So as the next level loads and we get to the docks, we get a quick Rogue Warrior's gaze shot of Marcinko's ass before the level starts. And it's around this time in my playing that I discovered that a perfectly valid strategy, even in higher difficulties, is to just sprint directly up to an enemy and hit the close kill button. Because there is no penalty for doing that. But then partway through this level, we get our first twist in the game's tale of international intrigue. That the missiles aren't leaving North Korea by boat, they're leaving by train. So, for any geography buffs out there, that narrows down where the missiles could be going to one of two destinations. North Korea only borders 3 other countries. South Korea, which is not going to have trains running to it for hopefully obvious reasons. China, which has the largest border with them. or the Soviet Union, which shares a tiny little 11-mile stretch of border with North Korea at this time. Regardless of which one it is, that means that missiles are being manufactured in North Korea, the non-ICBM armed state, and shipped over to one of its 2 ICBM armed neighbors. That doesn't make a lot of sense so far, but maybe the game will help us figure out how it does make sense later. We don't know what's happening at this point, but Admiral Payton wants us to go ahead and stop it, which also is not going to be a declaration of war. Specifically, what isn't going to be a declaration of war is shooting up a train yard of like 50 North Korean soldiers and screaming things at them like,
"Goddamn cock breath coming, motherfuckers!"
or,
"Better dead than red, asshole!"
But after we shoot through the whole train yard and yell stuff at them while we do it, we find that the train is already loaded, and so we're gonna ride it to where it's going. And Admiral Payton reminds us, of course,
keep a low profile, asshole. We don't want to make any headlines.
So we find out as the next mission starts that yeah, these missiles are going to the Soviet Union over a bridge by train. There's actually only one bridge that connects Russia to North Korea, which means we're at the Friendship Bridge, which does in fact sometimes move cargo by train between the two countries. In order to stay out of headlines per Admiral Payton's request, we open fire on more troops on the bridge and then explode the Friendship Bridge in also not a declaration of war by the United States. And the reason we're doing this is because we need to stop the USSR from gaining access to missiles. If you already know about the Cold War, you might be aware of the fact that the USSR already had missiles and nuclear weapons, and at this point the ability to hit any target on the globe. So we stopped the missiles from leaving North Korea and being received by the Soviet Union, and blew up a major international bridge for some reason. And after we finish fighting through the bridge, we find a piece of paper with a missile drawn on it and say,
"The missile program isn't Korean, it's fucking Soviet."
Jesus Christ. They kept it in their neighbor's yard to keep it off our radar.
Looks like it.
Because if they didn't keep it off our radar, the United States would learn the awful truth that the Soviet Union was developing missile technology. Anyway, understanding that the missiles are on their way to the Soviet Union, Marcinko vows that he's going to follow them and he's going to stop them. Now, Admiral Payton at this point tells him, like, no, don't do that. If you do that, that might be an incident that provokes war or something. But Marcinko's got the answer for that, though.
Say it again, boss, you're breaking up.
Regarding the risk that Marcinko might escalate the Cold War, he says that the Admiral has his panties in a twist and that, goddammit, he's paid for results, not methods. Which, in this case, the result is escalating the Cold War. He says he needs to stop this shit once and for all, but what he's stopping is the USSR building up missile technology inside of their own borders. The next step in Marcinko's covert infiltration plan happens at an old Russian palace where the missiles have been shipped to, and he sneaks in by driving a truck directly up to and then loudly climbing over a broadly lit steel gate directly in front of the palace's main doors. But he infiltrates the palace, killing a lot more Soviet soldiers on Soviet soil, and he finds a secret entrance that goes underground. And ultimately, Marcinko is proven right, because deep in the heart of this underground secret missile silo is the most nefarious secret of all, that the USSR has developed an SDI program. Just like the program the United States has been working on openly since almost 4 years before this game takes place. Admiral Payton suggests that this is going to mean the end of the Cold War, and so Marcinko ultimately decides to reprogram the targeting computers and launch the missiles directly into the palace that he's currently standing in. Something that he definitely has the skill set to do. But what I start to realize between the end of this and the beginning of the next mission is that what the game is implying is that because the USSR has gained access to a working SDI program, they absolutely will begin lobbing nuclear weapons at the United States. That is just a foregone conclusion. And this one part of the game's story absolutely kills me, so I feel like I have to break it down a little bit more. In case you didn't know, SDI stands for Strategic Defense Initiative, and it was a project kicked off during the Reagan administration. The whole purpose of it was to build ways to stop ICBMs from being fired at the US or any of its allies, either by shooting them out of the sky with lasers from space, or by sending up smaller ballistic missiles to intercept the incoming nuclear ones. The US spent tons and tons of money on it, and then it didn't really result in what we wanted because most of the technology was basically just wishful thinking. We still, to this day, as far as I'm aware, are not firing lasers from space to shoot missiles out of the sky. If it did much of anything, It might have spooked the Soviet Union into thinking they were further behind in the Cold War arms race than they actually were, but even if it did, that didn't necessarily do anything to help bring the conflict to an end or to improve relations. Your mileage might vary on that. But about this bombshell revelation that we find in the game. First of all, what Marcinko finds in the bottom of the palace, from what we're shown, is that there are controls to target and fire non-nuclear ballistic missiles, and then an on-screen illustration of what an SDI program might look like, just in case the Soviet scientists working there had to keep reminding themselves what they were doing. They even have this little unrelated animation of a missile hitting Washington, D.C. at the end. It's adorable. But I wouldn't say that he's uncovered incontrovertible proof that the Soviets have cracked the code and are now invincible against nuclear attacks. In fact, the US still had its system of the nuclear triad in place since the 1960s. So even if the Soviets were invincible to ICBMs, continent-crossing missiles aren't the only way that you could get nuked. Submarines from anywhere in the ocean could fire them off, and there are still planes that could just carry them and drop them. They haven't really stopped mutually assured destruction. Second, like I mentioned before, the only thing we really have evidence of is that the Soviets are working on a program, at worst they've completed a program, that would rival the program of what the US has already been working on openly for 3 years. The most evil part of the Soviet version of the program is that it works. Third, Marcinko decides to bomb the palace silo so that they won't be able to use the missile defense program to win World War III, but this is a technology that the Soviets have discovered. There's no indication that this is like the only site where this kind of capability exists. And in fact, in the little cartoon that he finds down there, Marcinko watches all the missiles launching from Eastern Europe, and we're all the way over by the Sea of Japan. The little cartoon missile that hits Washington, D.C. comes from Western Russia. Even if it was the only site, the whole concept of saving the world by blowing up this missile silo is kind of dependent on the idea that Marcinko can just kill the ideas that made the technology possible. If the game is really saying that the Soviet Union has refined its technology to the point that they can use magic missiles to stop any threats from hitting them, and the US is still stuck failing to make its space lasers work, and also that the Soviet Union is determined to nuke us immediately, then it is already too late for any ponytailed psychopath to swoop in and save the day by hacking a computer and blowing up a palace. Finally though, what I find the most funny about this entire thing is the idea that Mikhail Gorbachev is going to pull off this worldwide surprise attack. 3 years before the fall of the Berlin Wall, a year and a half before troops are withdrawn from Afghanistan, literally 1 month before he writes a letter to the world pleading for a de-escalation of the nuclear arms race, Mikhail Gorbachev, the Soviet reformer who arguably improved East-West relations more than any other person in living history, is suddenly given a gift of technology. One that means that the Soviet people can all rest easy at night laying in their beds and knowing that they're safe from the specter of nuclear war. And so what is he, Mikhail fucking Gorbachev, going to do with this new boon of security for his people? He is going to immediately and unquestioningly bathe the world in atomic hellfire for the glory of the communist system. Or at the very least, he would, if he wasn't about to be stopped by the rogue warrior. The rest of the game isn't really 100% clear to me, if I'm being honest, like even more so than the rest. The game is done with cutscenes from this point on, so until the end of the game, pre-mission exposition is all you're gonna get. We sent missiles to blow up the palace, but then we also sneak underneath the palace and blow up individual missiles in the silo. Then we blow up a hydroelectric dam because it powers a dry dock that has a submarine, and the submarine is somehow going to be the key to winning World War III. After we blow up the dam, we also just blow up the submarine anyway, and then that's the end of the game. I remember liking during the level where you blow up the dam that it's blowing up and basically just raining down bodies all around you while you rappel down a series of ropes that someone has already laid in place for you. I also really like that in the dry dock level, you keep going further and further underground down these sets of stairs. It reminded me a lot of dropping down those holes in Silent Hill 2. Like maybe the dry dock is just us witnessing Marcinko descending into his own madness. After the submarine blows up, that's it. That's the end. Right around 2 hours.
I heard the commies cost you 2 good men, Commander. I'm sorry.
Not as sorry as those motherfuckers.
It doesn't really matter, though, because the very best part of the game has been saved for last. And that part comes by way of the end credits. I mentioned before that the music for the game is pretty good. It's done by a composer named Mark Rutherford. He's done the scores for Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, some of the Killzone games, some of the Little Big Planet games, Sniper Elite, and I think one of the Assassin's Creeds. But there's a song that plays in the credits once you finish the campaign. One that only plays if you finish the game and not just play the credits from the menu. And that song is not provided by Mark Rutherford. It's provided by a guy named Mark Lampert, who's a sound designer from Bethesda. He must have somehow got involved in the production of the game from the publisher's side. I don't know. He's helped lead the sound design for several of the Elder Scrolls games, a couple of the Fallout games, but here, his sole contribution in the game's credits is for this one song, and then again in the special thanks. Specifically, it's a funky little beat that doesn't fit with the rest of the game's music at all, but where Mark has taken a whole bunch of the raw voice files from Mickey Rourke, and he's arranged and edited them into a vocal track for the song. He even has it so that the first verse of the song has lines that half rhyme together. It's really impressive, and it's very funny.
You morons will love this. Hope you assholes like fireworks. Ooh! Fucking commies keep getting in my way. Well, surprise, motherfuckers.
Happy fucking birthday.
That's right, Nighty Night, you sweet piece of shit. Enjoy the ride, cocksucker. Have a nice trip. Boom! Anytime, anywhere, any place. Kicking ass. Send me the bill, motherfucking cocksuckers. I'm over here, fuckface.
There's gonna be fucking asses bleeding all over the place.
Sorry. Give me a goddamn break. Good place. Goddamn duck breath coming, motherfuckers! You fucking asshole. You fucking pig farmers. Drop dead, motherfucker, you fucking amateurs.
But to me, this is the tip of the hat from the developers. We don't know why Bethesda chose to make Rogue Warrior, but we know the project wasn't working with the old studio, and for some reason, we know that Bethesda sought out Rebellion to help them get the job done instead of letting it fall apart. The writing in the game is atrocious. The story barely makes any sense. The gunplay doesn't feel weighty. Grenades don't feel satisfying at all. The enemy AI is pathetic. There are like 8 character models in the entire game to cover all your enemies. There's no jump button. It takes less than 2 hours to play through the whole thing. But the thing is, Rogue Warrior never deserved to have any of that anyway. It never deserved to have great writing, or a well-researched story, or gameplay that's anything more than basic, and definitely not more than 2 hours of your time. It never deserved the jump button. When this song plays at the end of it all, it feels to me like Rebellion looking over to us as the player and saying, yeah, we know. The development team had an assignment that they had to get done. Not every person working in a creative space has the luxury of working on something they're really passionate about. But the team here took a lot of risks in the development, and even though I think it's one of the worst games I've ever played, it's a lot more memorable than the dime a dozen, run-of-the-mill bland shooters that came out around the same time. In that same E3 interview that I mentioned before, after the producer from Rebellion says that the studio was approached by Bethesda to get the job done, the thing that he cannot stop gushing about is that they got Mickey Rourke to do the voice talent for the game. Several times he describes it as the team feeling like they got a steal in just getting him to participate. And at one point he even says that the way that Rourke delivers his lines has a way of elevating the game into a black comedy. They knew. When the game came out in 2009, it was obviously torn to pieces by critics, and rightfully so. Because more than anything else, the game was released as a full-price, $60 game. Anyone who reviewed it at the time had a moral obligation to protect consumers from spending their money on a massive pile of shit. And if you go back and look at them, that's the tone that you're going to hear in a lot of the reviews that exist for the game. Some even say that if it was either free or in a bargain bin at Walmart, it might be stupid enough to have some fun with. Well, in 2025, I think it's an entirely different question now. Rogue Warrior has at long last achieved its bargain bin status. The game is available to stream if you have Game Pass or PlayStation Plus. It's available for $5 on Steam, but do be warned that you're going to have to mess with it to make it even remotely playable. There's not like an extensive community of Rogue Warrior fans putting out community patches for this. It is one of the worst games I've ever had the privilege of playing in a really, really long time. But I'm glad that I did. The team getting themselves across the finish line for their publisher's sake, the megalomania of Dick Marcinko, the voice acting performance of the decade by Mickey Rourke, the payoff of Mark Lampert's funky tongue-in-cheek remix. As far as I'm concerned, it succeeds in recontextualizing the question of whether or not this is worth 2 hours of your time.
noise, bitch. Oh, fuck. Shit. Oh, shit. Jesus fucking Christ. Knock, knock. Listen, you little piece of shit, you asswipe. I'm gonna wipe my ass with your tongue. I got bullets for every one of those motherfuckers. Here comes the pain. Brother, my day just got a whole lot more fucked up. Rock and roll, motherfuckers, rock and roll. Drop dead, motherfucker, you fucking amateurs. Come on, hold your balls, let's go. Eat this, you motherfuckers. Shit. Goddamn amateurs. You fucking pig farmers. Fuck me. Asswipe. Oh, fuckers. I got 2 men who aren't coming home, and I'm not letting... Jesus, you ass. Boom time. Go fetch, catch it. Jesus, son of a bitch. Yeah, well, you eat shit and die, boy. You eat shit and die. You're mine, baby. You're mine, you piece of shit. Shoddy fucking commie engineering. Special delivery, assholes. Fuck. Assholes are out in force. Which one of you cocksuckers ordered the special? Fuck you, asshole. Chew on this, fuckhead. Yeah, little capitalism for you, huh? Pussy, you fucking shit-eating pig. That's enough out of you, asshole. Sorry, assholes, your quiet day at the office is about to get severely fucked up. Oh, that was pretty. I'll see you numbnut motherfuckers on the other side. Come on, fuckface. Guess who's shit for brains, huh, you little piece of shit? Keep looking the other way, asshole. Happy 4th of July, motherfuckers. Fucking commie rent-a-cops. You gotta be fucking kidding me. That's right, nighty-night, you sweet piece of shit. Just fucking die slow, die like the piece of shit you are. Sleepy time, you fucking motherfucker. Enjoy the ride, cocksucker. Shit. Don't these motherfuckers have something to do? Your shoes untied. Here comes the boom. You're mine, asshole. I'm over here, fuckface. What the fuck are you looking at, huh? You're mine, fuckstain. I'm over here, you prick. Gotta get the drop on them bastards. Get dead, fuckbag. Oh. Send me the bill, cocksuckers.